be where we know that what we want is going to happen. We hate that. We hate that, and no wonder. So, and then, there are varying degrees of that, obviously. You can really be where you don't know what's going to happen, or you can only be there to some degree. But by and large, we're conservative creatures, even if we're liberal in temperament. We can't tolerate that much uncertainty. And you might ask, well, why? And the answer is, well, because you can be hurt. Pain, you can be damaged, you can become intolerably anxious, and you can die. So it's no wonder you're sensitive. We're very sensitive to negative emotion. And so our identities, functional identity regulates your emotion, but you do that in concert with other people. In the first chapter of the new book, Beyond Order, the rule is don't casually denigrate social institutions or creative achievement. That's that balance again. I make the case that most of your sanity is socially distributed. And what I mean by that is, well, let's say that you know how to behave. You're well socialized. You can play with others. Now, I said already in this conversation, if you didn't learn to play with others between the time you were 2 and 4, you will never learn. And psychologists have beat their heads against the wall trying to rehabilitate antisocial children. They can't do it after the age of 4.
Is that because areas of the brain just don't develop?
Well, it seems to be partly because the kids fall farther and farther behind. So let's say you make the leap from egocentric dependence on your mother at 2 and 3 to immersion in a peer group. Well, then you pick peers that are at your same developmental level, and you chase each other up the developmental ladder. And the longer you're out of that, the farther you fall behind. And so, 5-year-old kids might come across another 5-year-old kid who tends to cry too much if they don't get their way. And they'll say, we don't want to play with the baby. And what they're saying is, we have to find someone who's at our developmental level, shares our developmental horizon, so that we can mutually scaffold our further development. Now, they're not going to say that, obviously, but that's the situation. And kids test each other out when they first meet. So do adults. Game. Can you play? Are you playing at the same level as me? I'm playing my game at the level that will further my development. Can you play along with me? If not, well, maybe you're lower in status and I can pull you up as a mentor. Maybe you're higher in status and I can learn from you. But if you're a peer, we can play together. Anyways, if you're acceptable to your peers and you behave well, they'll accept you. And then they tell you all the time if you're acting appropriately. If your jokes are funny, if you're dominating the conversation, if you're bringing something of value to the table. And all you have to do is pay attention to the social cues, and you'll keep yourself regulated.
Okay, I want to dive in here, and I'm going to see if I'm tracking all of this, because I'm putting this in a larger context of this really matters, and it applies directly to something that's happening in the world. It seems to me that you don't dive into things unless they have real relevance. So is it fair to define identity as the self-narrative that emerges from a nearly infinite number of interactions with other people and nature itself?
Well, I would say yes, but that gets to the point, it's so broad, it's almost, it starts to lack definition.
So I can take it finer than that. I am trying to sort of find the borders, and then I will work in. Okay, so if we still remain true at that point, then having in the book you walk through a lot of some of the people that you've done psychoanalysis with, and so we get a lot of insights into the actual people that you're dealing with and how people can begin to tell themselves a narrative that is very dysfunctional, and you help them out. I don't want to say easily because that sounds like it cheapens it, but pretty straightforward in helping them reframe. And framing is something I'm obsessed with. And so our identity is based on this. It's a self-narrative that we tell ourselves based on the interactions we have with other people and nature, such that we begin to solidify a set of behaviors that make sense for us based on the goals that we want to achieve and where we're trying to go. Am I still good?
Yes. Well, you improved your definition by adding the behavioral element, because I would say the fundamental element of identity is what you act out. On top of that, there's the story that you tell.
Do I have to be consciously aware of it?
Well, you're consciously aware of some of it, not of other elements of it. You can't be consciously aware of everything you do.
And does the conscious and unconscious alike make up my identity as you define it?
Your identity is the story you tell about your actions in the world, but it's also your actions in the world.
Okay. Now, why does my identity, and I assume as I understand it, why does my identity as I understand it matter to the course of my life?
Because it's the structure of it's the structure from which the plans that you implement in the world originates. And you're always acting in the world. You have problems to solve all the time. And you have to solve, there's all sorts of problems you have to solve to stay alive. And you have to solve them for today, but you have to solve them in a way that works for today, that doesn't screw up tomorrow too bad and leaves next week intact and next month and next year. And so there's a continuum of you. So that's the other reason why your identity can't just be you. Or how you feel right now, because you're not only who you are right now and how you feel right now. You're this strange entity that exists right now, but that already existed in the past and that is going to repeat itself into the future. And so you're actually a community of individuals stretched out across time, and the plans that you implement have to be beneficial for that entire community of individuals. And it's going to be the case that there isn't much difference between you acting properly with regards to your extended temporal self and you acting properly in relationship to other people.
That's interesting.
So you're stuck with society just because you know that there's a future. You're stuck with society even if you're solipsistic, right? If you think you're the only consciousness that there is, there's still the fact that you have duration across time, and that, you have to take into account what the consequence for your actions is going to be on the 50-year-old Tom and the 80-year-old Tom. And so
now here's a question. Do you think that there's something that has pathologized the creation of useful identities in today's culture?
Well, I think each person can judge that for themselves to some degree. I mean, the more functional your identity, the better regulated your emotion. The more positive emotion, the less negative emotion. Certainly, negative emotion doesn't rise to an intolerable level if you're fortunate, your identity is well constructed. I think that any insistence that identity is something other than a pragmatic set of actions, let's say, that orient you properly in the world is sufficiently sparse so that it isn't going to solve the problems that have to be solved. So I might insist, I'm whoever I think I am at the moment, and if you were polite, you would go along with that. And to some degree, I would be right. We do that when we allow people to save face. But if I'm right, we go along with their presuppositions, presumptions. We don't call them on their mischief. And a certain amount of that's polite. But that doesn't alleviate the necessity for me of adopting a role that other people find valuable. Otherwise, what the hell do I have to trade? And you might say, well, why should I have to trade? Well, if you can live all by yourself, then you don't have to trade. But if you can't, you have to bring something of value to the table. And you can't insist on its value. Other people have to agree to that. And so I can't say, well, I'm my sexual identity. It's like, yeah, that's a part of your identity.
So this is where I wanted to go. So you brought up the idea or the example of somebody giving a sexual identity of some kind, and